and that as a general matter, it is the president's chosen advisors who have the best sense of the president's aims and intentions, both with respect to the policies he intends to enact and with respect to the interests that must be secured to govern successfully on behalf of the American people. This chapter focuses on key features of and recommendations for several of the EOP's important components. U.S. Office of Management and Budget assists the president in the execution of his policy agenda across the government by employing many statutory and executive procedural levers to bring the bureaucracy in line with all budgetary, regulatory, and management decisions. Properly understood, it is a president's air traffic control system with the ability and charge to ensure that all policy initiatives are flying in sync and with the authority to let planes take off and, at times, ground planes that are flying, of course.
Okay, so they're saying the Office of Management and Budget are there to make sure that Trump's kind of agenda is being like executed, if you will, and that people are not like doing something that Trump doesn't want to be done. We are now seeing a situation in which Trump is, we're now seeing a situation in which Trump can't halted all federal funding. That's part of this process that they're describing here. That is, of course, illegal. He can't do that. And it was halted by a federal judge, I think, or something. They basically said you can't do that. You need to re-enable the funding since it was already kind of approved by Congress. But this seems to be the plan that they're going with right now.
OMB's key roles include developing and enforcing the president's budget and executing the appropriations laws that fund the government. L, managing agency and personnel performance, procurement policy, financial management, and information technology. L, developing the president's regulatory agenda, review.
When it says L, I've noticed that it's usually giving us a list. There's something in a list it's laying down.
Doing new regulatory actions, reviewing federal information collections, and setting and enforcing federal information policy. And L, coordinating and clearing agency communications with Congress, including testimonies and views on draft legislation. OMB cannot perform its role on behalf of the president effectively if it is not intimately involved in all aspects of the White House policy process and lacks knowledge of what the agencies are doing. Internally to the EOP, ensuring that the policy formulation procedures developed by the White House to serve the president include OMB is one of any OMB director's major responsibilities.
I'm not actually sure how involved in anything the OMB is supposed to be, the Office of Management and Budget. I don't know. Maybe it's supposed to be very involved, but I get the impression that since these people are talking about it so much and defining its powers, it's kind of hinting to me that they're trying to give it powers that it doesn't have, the Office of Management and Budget.
Common meme of those who intend to evade OMB review is to argue that where resources are not being discussed, OMB's participation is optional. This ignores both OMB's role in all downstream execution and the reality that it has the only statutory tools in the White House that are powerful enough to override implementing agencies' bureaucracies. The director must view his job as the best, most comprehensive approximation of the president's mind as it pertains to the policy agenda, while always being ready with actual options to affect that agenda within existing legal authorities and resources. This role cannot be performed adequately if the director acts instead as the ambassador of the institutional interests of OMB and the wider bureaucracy to the White House. Once its reputation as the keeper of commander's intent is established, then and only then does OMB have the ability to shape the most efficient way to pursue an objective. Externally,
so only when it has a grip on exactly what the president wants, only then shall they do something, shall they act in the president or on the president's behalf. They're basically this may have been the case anyway, but they're consolidating power. They're describing how they're going to consolidate power. And they're politicizing branches of the government or departments that were not previously politicized. Like the Office of Management and Budget, that may have just been a normal branch or a normal department that just did their job. But now they are obligated to operate under the president's direct instructions. This is all part of kind of the plan to politicize the system, which is about as destructive as it gets. I just finished writing a book titled Was Hitler an Atheist? It talks about religions during the Third Reich and how they work together. Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Protestants. And I even address the lies told by the evangelical world about Bonhoeffer. It's on Audible and Amazon. Okay, let's continue.
The director must ensure that OMB has sufficient visibility into the deep caverns of agency decision-making. One indispensable statutory tool to that end is to ensure that policy officia, the program associate directors managing the vast resource management off RMOs, personally sign what are known as the apportionments. In 1870, Congress passed the anti-deficiency funding, creating artificial funding shortfalls that Congress would have to fill. The law mandated that all funding be allotted or apportioned in installments.
So, in 1870, one more time?
Congress passed the anti-deficiency funding, creating artificial funding shortfalls that Congress would have to fill. The law mandated that all funding be allotted or apportioned in installments.
Okay, so it's just talking about how Congress kind of controls the power of the purse, if you will.
This process, whereby agencies come to OMB for allotments of appropriated funding, is essential to the effective financial stewardship of taxpayer dollars. OMB can then direct on behalf of a president the amount, duration, and purpose of any apportioned funding to ensure against waste, fraud, and abuse, and ensure consistency with the president's agenda and applicable laws.
Waste, fraud, and abuse is like a dog whistle at this point. When Republicans are asked, how are you going to solve these financial problems? Like, we're so deep in debt in the US, $30 trillion or something that we have to pay back. Republicans' answer is never to raise taxes. It is always solve waste, fraud, and abuse. And they've been saying that for like literal decades. I remember hearing it when I was little. And it never happens. They never tried to tackle this waste, fraud, or abuse issue. I mean, how many audits has the Department of Defense failed? Like 1 billion every single time, practically. And really, you're trying to prevent fraud and abuse of all things. Like waste, I get, we can clean up waste. But fraud and abuse? The Republicans? That doesn't sound like them.
The vast majority of these apportionments were signed by career officia, the deputy associate directors, DADs, until the Trump administration placed this responsibility in the hands of the PIADs, and thereby opened wide vistas of oversight that had escaped the attention of policy officia. The Biden administration subsequently reversed this decision. No director should be chosen who is unwilling to restore apportionment decision-making to the PIAD's personal review, who is not aggressive in wielding the tool on behalf of the president's agenda, or who is unable to defend the power against attacks from Congress. Noted that each of OMB's primary functions, along with other executive and statutory roles, is carried out with the help of many essential OMB support office. The two most important offices for moving OMB at the will of a director are the Budget Review Division, BRD, and the Office of General Counsel, OGC. The director should have a direct and effective relationship with the head of the BRD, considered the top career office within OMB, and transmit most instructions through that office, because the rest of the agency is institutionally inclined toward its direction and responds accordingly. The BRD inevitably will translate the directions from policy officia to the career staff, and at every stage, it is obviously vital that the director ensure that this translation is an accurate one. In addition, many key considerations involved in enacting a president's agenda hinge on existing legal authorities. The director must ensure the appointment of a general counsel who is respected, yet creative and fearless in his or her ability to challenge legal precedents that serve to protect the status quo.
Wow. So they're saying when we appoint somebody to work within the government, like in the office of, what was it? The office of the Attorney General or something? When we pick somebody to do that job, we need to find somebody who is willing to basically violate the norms, break the rules, in the interest of accomplishing the president's end goal. That's what they're saying here. That is wrong. That is not okay. This is exactly what we shouldn't want. Like, seriously.
This is vital within OMB, not only with respect to the adequate development of policy options for the president's review, but also with respect to agencies that attempt to protect their own institutional interests and foreclose certain avenues based on the mere assertion and not proof that the law disallows it, or that, conversely, attempt to disregard the clear statutory commands of Congress. In general, the director should empower a strong deputy director with authority over the deputy for management, the PDs, and the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs to work diligently to break down barriers within OMB and not allow turf disputes or a lack of visibility to undermine the agency's principal budget, management, and regulatory functions.
So they're describing how they're going to go about rewriting the entire thing and just trampling all over the law, just ignoring the law and defending their incorrect position later. They're saying, we intend to break the law and figure it out afterward, which, by the way, is exactly what Donald Trump did with the spending freeze. He does not have the right to do that. I don't even know why that happened. Why did they go along with the spending freeze? This is a constitutional crisis. The president does not have the right to do that. This was apportioned by Congress, not by the executive branch. I guess the spending freeze was halted by a judge. That's a plus. But this is what we have to look forward to, this kind of thing where Trump is just going to do things. Whether he has the right to do it is immaterial to the fact that he's going to do it. And so he's just going to take as much power as he can. And it's going to depend on us to push back against it when it happens.
OMB should work toward a one OMB position on behalf of the president and represent that view during the various policymaking processes. Budget. The United States today faces an untenable fiscal situation and owes $31 trillion on a debt that is steadily increasing.
Yeah, you know why that is? It's not spending. It's because Republicans keep cutting taxes. They keep cutting them more and more and more and more and more. And for what? What is that accomplishing exactly? Nothing. It's accomplishing nothing but putting us even deeper in debt. Republicans want to make the government so small that you can drown it in a bathtub, quote unquote. But since they can't do that, since they can't, since they have to work with the rest of Congress, which refuses to cut Medicaid, for example, or whatever, instead of doing it the legal way, they're going to just cut the budget, cut the revenue. They're going to prevent revenue from coming in by decreasing taxes on the filthy rich until we owe $100 trillion and we're out of luck. That's it. The whole thing comes crashing down, or we eliminate Medicaid, one or the other. That's the plan. That's the goal with the Republican Party right now. That's what we're watching play out. And honestly, that's what we've been watching play out for a long time.
The OMB director should present a fiscal goal to the president early in the budget development process to address the federal government's fiscal irresponsibility. This goal would help.
It's not fiscal irresponsibility. The U.S. government has been reasonably fiscally responsible. It's the fact that Republicans keep cutting the budget, cutting revenue by decreasing taxes on the rich. Have you seen a tax cut, by the way? You personally, have you seen one recently? I don't know that I've ever been affected by a tax cut in my life. They're not cutting taxes for us. They're cutting taxes for them.
To align the months-long process of developing the actual proposals for inclusion in the budget. Though some mistakenly regard it as a mere paper-pushing exercise, the president's budget is in fact a powerful mechanism for setting and enforcing public policy at federal agencies. The budget team includes 6 resource management office that, together with the BRD and other components, help the director of OMB to develop and execute detailed agency spending plans that bear on every major aspect of policy formation and execution at federal agencies. Through initial priority setting and ongoing supervision of agency spending, OMB's budget team plays a key role in executing policy across the executive branch, including at many agencies wrongly regarded as independent. The RMOs, each of which is led by a political appointee, known as the PAD and a career DAD, are separated into 6 functional units: L National Security, L Natural Resources, Energy and Science, L Health, L Education, Income Maintenance and Labor, L Transportation, Justice and Homeland Security, Commerce and Housing. Because the RMOs are institutionally ingrained in nearly all policymaking and implementation across the executive branch, they play a critical role in helping the director to implement the president's public policy agenda. However, because each RMO is responsible for formulating and supervising such a wide range of policy details, many granular but critical policy decisions are effectively left to the career professionals who serve across administrations. To enhance the
So they're saying that many policy decisions are left to non-political actors who operate, within every administration. They're just there to do their job. They're not political actors. Biden didn't feel that they were too politicized to work for him. Trump didn't feel they were too politicized to work for him. Obama, the same. Bush, the same. They just continued working in the government this whole time. They're not politicized. They're just there to do a job. These people are saying that they want to replace them. And we actually saw a step in that direction. I didn't realize this before when reading this the first time around, but they can't just fire everybody in the federal government. There are 2 million employees in the federal government that that do various jobs. They can't just fire them. They have to have a good reason to do so. As a result of that hang-up, Donald Trump's administration sent out emails to every federal employee, all of them, that basically said that they're willing to buy them out. They're willing to pay them to leave their position so that Trump can fill it with political actors. All they had to do was type resign in the email. I believe that he expects to get about 10% of the federal workforce replaced by doing so, but by those means. I'm not sure if that's realistic or what, but even 10% is lower than I thought it would be. But even 10% is a group of people that are heavily politicized and willing to do anything that Trump tells them to do. That is a disturbing that is disturbing, about as disturbing as it gets.
Director's ability to help the president drive policy at the agencies, the existing 6 RMOs should be divided into smaller subject matter areas, allowing for more pads, and each of these pads should have a deputy pad. This expanded pool of RMOs with additional political leadership would enable more comprehensive direction and oversight of policy development and implementation. Regardless of whether Congress adopts the president's full set of budget recommendations, the president should reintroduce the concept of administrative pay-as-you-go, or administrative pay-go. This simple procedural requirement imposes budget neutrality on the discretionary choices of federal agencies, of which there are many in nearly all areas of policymaking. This simple step forces the executive branch to control what it can control. The principle may occasionally yield to other overarching requirements, such as a presidential regulatory budget, but in nearly all cases, administrative pay-go plays a unique and indispensable role in enforcing fiscal responsibility at federal departments and agencies.
Enforcing fiscal responsibility. What that means is we've cut taxes to shit. We're taking in basically nothing through income taxes at this point, compared to what we used to at the very least. And now we want these federal organizations to stop spending pretty much anything to match the fact that we have cut taxes to absolutely nothing. This is the long-term Republican plan that they've been working on for ever.
The president should use every possible tool to propose and impose fiscal discipline on the federal government. Anything short of that would constitute abject failure. Management. The management office of OMB, the M side as it is often called, is responsible for carrying out several important agency oversight functions, many of which are statutory. The management team includes the following office, led by presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed individuals: the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, OFPP; L, the Office of Performance and Personnel Management, OPPM; L, the Office of Federal Financial Management, OFM; the Office of the Federal Chief Information Office, OFCIO; L, the Made in America Office, MIAO, which was added by the Biden administration and is not a Senate-confirmed slot. Each of these offices has responsibilities and authorities that a president can use to help drive policy across the government.
So the Office of Budget and Management, they're going through everything that the Office of Budget and Management should be doing to support Trump. And the first step is for the Office of Budget, that portion of the organization. That's what they're laying out here, I believe. The Office of Budget should basically cut everything, cut spending everywhere that they possibly can, everywhere. And the Office of Management should be decked out in Trump supporters.
Help drive policy across the government. It is vital that the director and his political staff, not the careerists, drive these offices in pursuit of the president's actual priorities and not let them set their own agenda based on the wishes of the sprawling, good government management community in and outside of government. Many directors do not properly prioritize the management portfolio, leaving it to the deputy for management, but such neglect creates purposeless bureaucracy that impedes a president's agenda, an M train to nowhere.
Purposeless bureaucracy that impedes the president's agenda. What that really means is it creates normal workers that are just there to do their job, and Trump wants to politicize it.
This office plays a critical role in leading the development of new policies and regulations concerning federal contracting and procurement. Through the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, which is generally chaired by the OFPP administrator, OFPP helps the director to set a wide range of policies for all of those who contract with the executive branch.
Again, OFPP is from the Office of Management and Budget. It's just like a sub-organization or whatever within it.
In the past, those government-wide contracting rules have played a key role in helping to implement the president's policy agenda. This office should be engaged early and often in OMB's effort to drive policy, including by obtaining transparency about entities that are awarded federal contracts and grants, and by using government contracts to push back against woke policies in corporate America.
Woke policies in corporate America. Why are you trying to regulate corporate America again? I thought that your goal was just to be as hands-off as possible as the government. In reality, that's not the goal. It was never the goal of the Republican Party, of Trump, or Project 2025. It was always to impose control onto everybody and everything, including the private sector.
This office, the director helps federal agencies to establish their performance goals and performance review processes. OPPM also works with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, OPM, to establish and manage personnel policies and practices across the federal government. The director should instruct OPPM to establish annual performance goals and review processes for agencies that reflect the president's agenda. OPPM should also be part of the president's strategy to set and enforce sensible policies and practices for the federal workforce. This office helps the director to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in federal programs, for example, through the Do Not Pay program. It should be part of effort to save precious taxpayer resources. This office guides the federal government's use and adoption of internet-based technologies to improve government operations and save taxpayer money.
The United States is one of the richest countries on the planet, but the cost of living is significantly higher here than other places. Through healthcare, for example. If we were spending less on healthcare, we would have more money to go around, like by a wide margin. And it's not like, well, right now, in the United States, people are spending like, $100 billion on healthcare per year or something. I'm just throwing out a number. It's not like that's what's happening, and we want to offset that cost of $100 billion to the government. That's not what's happening. What's happening is I want to get a single payer in there so that less money overall needs to be spent. If we could like erase all of the bureaucrats and everything else by going single payer, we might spend 50 billion instead of 100. Healthcare costs might drop by as much as half or even more than that. And so we would all be spending less. We would all have more to burn on the economy, and the economy would get stronger as a result, and everybody would be happier. But these insurance companies wouldn't, have a purpose anymore. And these people just can't grapple with that. They can't accept that these insurance companies are really just robbers that are taking advantage of everybody and everything around them and are paying politicians to continue to oppose single payer so they can continue to exist. Just disgusting, man.
Function of its leadership role, it is critical in interagency discussions on a wide range of technology issues. The OFI thus is an important part of the president's effort to modernize, strengthen, and set technology adoption policy for the executive branch. Building on the example and work of the Trump administration, President Biden established this office to centralize, carry out, and further develop the federal government's Buy American and other Made in America commitments. Its work ought to be continued and further strengthened. Regulatory and information policy. OMB's OIRA plays an enormous and vital role in reining in the regulatory state and ensuring that regulations achieve important benefit while imposing minimal burdens on Americans. The President of Regulatory Actions. The administration should likewise maintain the recent extension of those standards to regulatory actions of the U.S. Department of the historically independent agencies, as the Office of Legal Counsel has found is legally permissible. If the current administration proceeds with its declared intent to modify, provides the foundation for cost-benefit analysis, the next president should immediately begin to undo those changes. And
the next president should immediately undo the changes. Yeah, it's not perfect, the recording, but it's better than nothing.
Develop a rigorous, data-driven approach that will result in the least burdensome rules possible. The next president should humans also must pass through OIRA review. Because OIRA review often leads to fewer regulatory burdens, more regulatory benefit, and better coordination of regulatory policy, funding for OIRA tends to pay large dividends. Yet over the years, funding for OIRA has diminished. This trend should be reversed. The budget should also include sufficient full-time equivalent FTE employees to form regulatory advance teams that would consult with agencies on cost-benefit analysis and good regulatory practices at the beginning of the rulemaking process for the most important regulations. These teams would help agencies take cost-benefit analysis into account from the beginning of their rulemaking effort, which in turn would result in higher quality regulations and a swifter eventual OIRA review. To preserve the integrity of OIRA review, the staff who consult at the beginning of a rulemaking should not handle its eventual review. The next president should also reinstate the many executive orders signed by President Trump that were designed to make the regulatory process more so that state regulatory and fiscal operations are not commandeered by the federal government through so-called cooperative federalism programs. Additionally, the president should revise and sign an updated version of President Ronald Reagan's. The next president should strengthen implementation of the Information Quality Act. 19. Robustly use the authority of the Paperwork Reduction Act. 20. Carefully enforce the Privacy Act. 21. And ensure the sound execution of OIRA's statistical and other information policy functions.
Yeah, so a lot of this is just general, normal stuff. It's not like out of the ordinary or crazy, but it's valuable to listen to it beginning to end anyway, especially because every now and then we're just like sitting here listening, and then some crazy shit gets busted out, like out of nowhere, like, justification or explanation for how they intend to ban porn or something.
Regulatory cooperation agreements can also promote the further adoption of good regulatory practices, which improve market conditions for America and her allies. OIRA should also work with other components of OMB and apply OMB's Uniform Guidance for Grants and Agreements 22 and ensure that federal contract and grant guidelines satisfy EO 12866 and other centralized standards as appropriate. But executive reforms and actions, while vital, are not enough. Congress also must act. The next president should work with Congress to pass significant regulatory policy and process reforms, which could go a long way toward reining in the administrative state. Excellent examples of such legislation.
I get reining in the administrative state. There is no reining in that needs to be done. When they say administrative state, they mean the EPA. The EPA doesn't need to be quote unquote reined in. Nobody believes the EPA needs to be reined in except for companies that are being regulated by it. Like oil companies, pretty much the only people that think the EPA needs to be quote unquote reined in. This is just psychotic bullshit. It is psychotic bullshit that is being used to, or that is justifying giving intense power to the president. Intense power that the president should not have.
Include the Regulations Act 26, Unfunded Mandates, Accountability and Transparency Act 27, and Reins Act 28. Finally, the next president should work with Congress to maximize the utility of the Congressional Review Act, CRA 29, which allows Congress to undo midnight regulatory actions, including those disguised as guidance, on an accelerated timeline. To leverage the CRA's power to the maximum extent, Congress and the President should enact the Midnight Rules Relief Act 30, which would help to ensure that multiple regulatory actions could be packaged and voted on at the same time. Immediate and robust use of the CRA would allow the President to focus his rulemaking resources on major new regulatory reforms rather than devoting months or years to undoing the final rulemakings of the Biden administration. Legislative clearance and coordination. OMB plays a critical role in ensuring that the executive branch is aligned on legislative proposals and language, agency testimonies, and other communications with Congress. The director should use these authorities to enforce policy and message consistency aggressively and promote the effective engagement of the executive branch in legislative processes. National Security Council, NSC. The National Security Council, NSC, was established by statute to support the president in developing and implementing national security policy by coordinating across relevant departments and agencies, integrating authorities and resources toward common ends, and objectively assessing progress toward established goals. Led by the National Security Advisor, NSA, the NSC staff will be successful in implementing the president's national security goals only if it is made up of personnel with technical expertise and experience, as well as an alignment to the president's declared national security policy.
Yeah, this all sounds like normal stuff so far.
Priorities. The NSC must then chart a course that articulates and achieves the president's national security goals and objectives. The president should empower a strong NSC that not only has the power to convene the policy process, but also is entrusted with the full power of the presidency to drive the bureaucracy. Responsive and aligned with the president's goals and empowered to implement them, the NSA should immediately evaluate and eliminate directorates that are not aligned with the president's agenda and replace them with new directorates as appropriate that can drive implementation of the president's signature national security priorities. In addition to realigning the staff organization to the president's priorities, the NSA should assign responsibility for implementation of specified policy initiatives to senior NSC officia from across the NSC staff structure. These officia should develop, direct, and execute tangible action plans in coordination with multiple agencies to achieve measurable, time-defined milestones. Aligning NSC staff to the president's national security goals will provide clearer direction, a mandate for action, and a baseline of accountability that can be used to evaluate staff performance and the NSC's overall progress.
Yeah, this is just describing how the government should operate in this one specific department. There's nothing crazy about that one.
Accountable senior officia, themselves either political appointees or a minimum number of career detailees who are selected and vetted politically and report directly to political staff, should be the main day-to-day managers for interagency coordination and implementation of their assigned national security policy objectives. They should provide policy analysis for consideration by the broader NSC and relevant agencies and ensure timely responses to decisions made by the president. The accountable senior officia should be established at the direction of the NSA and draw on personnel and expertise from beyond the NSC, including OMB, the National Economic Council, and relevant federal agencies. The NSC staff and principals should work in tandem with the National Economic Council and OMB at all levels, presenting a united effort to achieve the president's goals and drawing on the latter's statutory authorities to guide the bureaucracy. To accomplish national objectives effectively, foreign policy should fully incorporate the economic instruments of national power. National security policy must also include the prioritized allocation of resources. When policies are divorced from the resources required to implement them, they are stillborn. Academic.
So if we have a policy, but we don't have the ability to enforce that policy, then it may as well not even be a policy, is what they're saying here, I think.
Exercises that undermine our national security and leave departments and agencies to their own devices. The accountable senior officia should be empowered to identify, recruit, clear, and hire staff who are aligned with and willing to shepherd the president's national security priorities.
So hire anybody who's willing to support Trump's goals.
NSC staff leads, under the direction of the NSA, should have the discretion to reduce the number of positions, and the NSC should be adequately resourced and authorized to adjudicate and hold security clearances internally with investigators who work directly for the NSC and whose sole task is to clear NSC officia.
Seems like a waste of time to listen to this since Trump has already denounced it. He agrees with some things they say and not with others. How are you going to determine which is which? He is literally doing every single thing in this document. Are you shitting me? There is not one single thing that he has not implemented so far. This is the plan. Like, I've gone through all of this so far, and in the past 9 days or whatever, however long, he has taken every single step. I don't know, like, how it could be any clearer. What do you mean, how do we know which is which or whatever? That makes no sense.
If certain staff are determined not to need high-level clearances, the question becomes whether they should be part of the NSC at all. The NSC should take a leading role in directing the drafting and thorough review of all formal strategies, the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, the Nuclear Posture Review, the Missile Defense Strategy, etc. In particular, The National Defense Strategy, which by tradition has evaded significant review, should be prioritized for White House review by the NSC and OMB. Both should also conduct reviews of operational war plans and global force planning and allocations with the Secretary of Defense to align them with presidential priorities and review all key policy and guidance intended for implementation by the heads of the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and the intelligence community before they are authorized for distribution. The NSC should rigorously review all general and...
Let me tell you how I know that this is Trump's plan. Every 4 years or every 2 years, or maybe it's even every year, I'm not sure, the Republican Party releases a platform. So does the Democratic Party. Everybody releases a platform that describes their goals and interests and everything for the year, what they intend to do over the course of the next year. In 2020, the Republicans didn't release a goal or a plan. There was no Republican Party platform. The platform basically just said whatever Trump wants. Stood behind him, no questions asked. So what does the Republican Party do is the question. The Heritage Foundation, the writers of Obamacare, decided to write the platform. This is it. This is the Republican platform. And it has been implemented by Donald Trump every step of the way. Every opportunity that these things came up, Trump implemented it. I believed that Project 2025 we were going to get half of Project 2025 and the other half wasn't going to happen. That's usually how it works. They start at a negotiation point and half of it's accomplished, the other half isn't. It's all being accomplished. All of it. Every bit of it is being implemented in government right now because I didn't expect a full-blown takeover of the government. I thought we would continue operating, in a democratic republic where, different parties have to form coalitions and agree with each other and things. I didn't know that there's going to be a full-blown takeover like that. We're getting literally everything, literally every single thing, every step of the way. That's why it's not a waste, because we can use this to literally predict the future, predict what happens next, because it is so exact.
State and the intelligence community before they are authorized for distribution. The NSC should rigorously review all general and FLA office promotions to prioritize the core roles and responsibilities of the military over social engineering and non-defense matters, including climate change, critical race theory, manufactured extremism, and other polarizing policies that weaken our armed forces and discourage our nation's fine men and women from...
Polarizing forces and topics? Polarizing? You're worried about polarizing topics or people or whatever? Trump is the most polarizing figure in U.S. politics in at least 100 years, maybe ever. I don't know. You're telling me you don't want polarizing things? No, they do want polarizing things. They just want their polarizing things is the difference. And the reason that these things exist, CRT isn't real, okay? That's not something that people do or something that they use or talk about or teach or whatever. It's talked about in law school, in certain law school classes, as a critical lens through which to try to understand the world, along with, critical feminist theory and critical whatever. There are a billion different critical theories out there that you kind of observe the law through to try to see it from a different perspective. That's a lawyer's job. They're not teaching this in classrooms. It's not happening in elementary school or whatever. Now, as for the other stuff, one more time.
Critical race theory.
Let me just step back a little bit further.
Planning and allocations with the Secretary of Defense to align them with presidential priorities and review all key policy and guidance intended for implementation by the heads of the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and the intelligence community before they are authorized for distribution. The NSC should rigorously review all general and FLA office promotions to prioritize the core roles and responsibilities of the military over social engineering and non-defense matters, including climate change, critical race theory, manufactured extremism.
Climate change policy and DEI and things. All of those things exist in private companies and in the military because it's massively beneficial for those things to exist, because it helps to understand issues and how we got there and how to resolve them. It's not because, leftists got into blah, 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 whatever. It's not because of that. It's just beneficial to society, beneficial to the company that we can work together and figure out how to do that most efficiently. Anyway, tell me what you think about it in the comments. This is just straight delusion.